we're going to be talking about how to get a job in space when you grow up. To start, I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm a third year student studying at ANU. I do astronomy and astrophysics and do research as well. And I'm part of the Young Stars team. And then as you just met Caitlin is a journalist by training, and she also works as the manager of marketing and communications at the ANU Institute for Space, where she helps to further Australia's mission to build a strong space industry and inspire future leaders. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about how you can get a job in space when you grow up and different careers in space. So before we do that, first we're going to do a little quiz. So I'll stop. Raise your hand if you or your parents have a mobile phone with a camera. Yeah, so I can see the hands are going up pretty fast. Almost everybody, right? Well, did you know that 1 in every 3 mobile phone cameras use technology that was invented to take pictures from NASA spacecraft? And raise your hand, or you can leave it raised, if you have a smoke detector in your house. It should be everybody. So keep your hand up if your smoke detector can tell the difference between a fire and a cooking dinner. Let's say you burnt some toast or something. Well, you know, at least most of the time it can tell the difference. So that's called an adjustable smoke detector. And these were invented by NASA to warn astronauts about fires, but also prevent false alarms. So your smoke detector is actually based on one used in Skylab, which is an old space station. And so the last one, do you have a memory foam pillow or a mattress? You probably should have a mattress. That was made to cushion astronaut seats during hard landings. So all of these things we use in our life, everyday life today. And years ago, these were just ideas, and then they became inventions in labs where researchers and engineers actually worked on them to make them better. So today there are researchers building lots of new things for space that we'll be able to use every day here on Earth in the future. They're also creating new technologies to learn more about the Earth and more about climate change. And here at ANU, we have researchers from across the university working on space challenges with Earth solutions through the ANU Institute for Space, which we call InSpace. So Kathleen Sweetapple is here from InSpace to say hi, and she works on the marketing and communications team, like I said, as I mentioned before.
Sophia, thank you so much for having me. Like I said before, I'm a huge fan, so I'm really excited to be here. And I'm also really glad to see so many people are thinking about how that they can work in space in different ways in the future. And so as you said, at InSpace, we work with researchers across the ANU who are building these new technologies like what you were talking about, and things that just basically make life in space and on Earth better. So right now, most people actually think that to work in space, you have to be an astronomer or an astronaut or an astrophysicist, but it's not true. And that's changing more and more every day as we move into the future. So at InSpace, we work with lots of researchers across the university. So like we'll hear from Caitlin later, she's a biologist. And then we've got Joyce, who's an engineer, and he's building things. And then Navisha's doing amazing things with lasers and telling us what's going on all across our Earth. So we'll get to hear from them. And we work with lots of different kinds of people across lots of different schools. And one of the things we try to tell people just in public and also throughout the university is that space is no longer about big governments going to the moon or building a space station. It's really become a business and an industry, and it's really ramping up here in Australia. So it's not something that just big governments can do anymore, which means lots of people now can work in the space industry. And because it's becoming an industry and a business, we're going to see all kinds of people like me who maybe don't have that technical background, but we're like, might be an accountant or a software engineer, marketing and communications, but people who love space and have a passion for it, but also have other skills that they've worked in other industries with. So if you fall in love with space and you love space, but say you also want to be a graphic designer, you can do all the graphic design you want just working for space businesses. And so there's going to be a lot of really cool opportunities coming up in the future, you know, not just for research, but also for people who have more skills that are day-to-day business skills. And so I think it's really interesting that we'll get a good mix of people today who can really talk about where we're going in the future and what kind of jobs you can have. So make sure you come up with lots of really great questions for all of us, because we're excited to talk to you, and we're excited that you're excited about going into space and working in space. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kathleen. So how about we meet our researchers now and our panelists? Okay, so the first person is Dr. Caitlin Burt. So Dr. Caitlin Burt is a biologist who studies plant proteins used to filter astronaut pee back into drinking water. So here on Earth, those proteins filter dirty water into drinking water in emergencies and help grow plants during drought. So Caitlin, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us how your work helps us on Earth as well.
Thanks, Sophia. I'll just share screen. All right, so between now and when you all finish school, we're expecting a boom in the scientific study of life that will position us to be able to spend more time in space. We can learn from the history of how life evolved and changed the environment on Earth and use this information to prove how we live both on Earth and in space in the future. So 2.7 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere had between 6 and 70% more carbon dioxide than today, and almost no free oxygen. So Earth had an atmosphere that we humans could not have survived in. But over time, microbes fixed lots of the carbon and generated oxygen. So it's tiny living organisms that are responsible for us having air to breathe on Earth today. And now there's around 21% oxygen in the air. And so this great oxygenation event happened around 2.4 billion years ago. And it's when Earth's atmosphere and shallow ocean first experienced a rise in oxygen, which is shown in this graph. And this is thought to be caused by cyanobacteria type algae photosynthesizing and producing oxygen. And their ability to store chemical energy enabled the subsequent development of multicellular forms of life like us. So when we travel into space, we might be able to utilize microbes like these guys to help us terraform planets and create oxygen, both in spaceships and on other planets. So taking microbes and plants with us into space is a key step that we need so that we can have the services that plants and microbes give us. So they help us do things like filter water and recycle nutrients, they clean the air, and they provide us with food. So my research team work on engineering crops and also on engineering water filter technologies that are relevant to supporting food and water security outcomes both on Earth and in space. We study the types of mechanisms that plants use to help adapt them so that they can thrive in challenging environments. And we study mechanisms that can be used for recycling of wastewater into clean water and purified valuable resources. So the pictures here show you two astronauts, a NASA astronaut and an ESA astronaut, and they're working on growing crops in space and testing water filters in space. So this is our research team based at the ANU. We've also formed a startup company, which is called Membrane Transporter Engineers, so that we can commercialize the components that we're building for advancing crops and filter technologies. So when lockdown ends, you're welcome to come and reach out if you want to visit our laboratory and learn a bit more about what we're doing, and welcome to throw any questions at us. Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin. Your work sounds fantastic. So let's hear from Dr. Joyce Matthew now, who develops space instruments and tests satellites and their components to make sure they'll work in space.
Yeah, hi, great to be here, and exciting to see many people are here. So as Sophia mentioned, I'm working as an instrumentation scientist at the Advanced Instrumentation and Technology Center of the Australian National University at Mount Stromlo here in Canberra. So I work mostly on design and development of sensors and cameras to be used in space for astronomical as well as for Earth observation. So why we need to go to space to look at stars and galaxies? Because Earth's atmosphere blocks some of the light which will be emitted by the astronomical sources. So we need to go to space to get a better picture, or to get the lights we cannot observe using ground-based telescopes. I also work on telescopes to look back on Earth from a satellite platform. This is for Earth observation. So this has applications to study more about Earth's weather and wildfire monitoring, the crops' health, things like that. Then I also work on testing development for satellites, because if you want to launch a satellite to space, it's the environment in space is not that easy. I mean, the space is hard. The space environment, if you say the pressure is too low, the temperature can be too cold or too hot. And so when you send a satellite using a rocket, because rocket is basically a taxi for you to go to space, but inside the rocket, it's not as comfortable as in a taxi. So you would feel a lot of vibrations, lot of launch alert forces, so which could, in principle, could destroy your satellite. So you have to be very careful that when you launch something using a satellite, it should not destroy itself. So we simulate those space conditions here at the Mount Stromlo space test facility. This would ensure that the satellite would withstand all the hard conditions in space. So that's in a nutshell that I work as an instrumentation scientist.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Matthew. And now we'll hear from Nimisha Chabra, who is getting her master's degree in physics and works with a team that uses lasers in space to measure important things on Earth like water movement. So please tell us about what you do, about what your work does, Nimisha.
Yeah, hi. So a lot of the work I do is about building and testing really accurate measurement tools to make measurements in space. So here on Earth, if you want to measure something, you could use a ruler or a measuring tape and pretty easily get the job done. But because in space, everything is so spread out and it's much bigger, we need really precise tools that can measure really big things. So a really good way to do that is to use lasers, because we know the speed of light. So we can send a laser beam and the light will bounce off the object and come back to our satellite. And that time it takes to travel can tell us a bit about the distance of objects. So yeah, that's a lot of the work I do. And my job is kind of building, calibrating, and testing these types of tools.
Thank you. That's fantastic hearing about all of the amazing work everyone does. So I guess I'd like to start off the panel with by asking, you know, how you all got interested in science in the first place.
I guess I'll chip in there, just get us going. So I think in the context of getting excited about science, great curiosity for how we can solve problems. I love how we come up against big challenges in life, and science helps us figure out how we're going to solve those challenges. So certainly for me, it was a problem-solving approach that I liked about science.
Yeah, maybe I can add what Caitlin was telling. So specific to the space science field, I got inspiration from my primary school science teacher, who used to tell scientific facts related to space in addition to the syllabus which she's supposed to teach. And she was also telling us during those times what the missions going on, what are the recent discoveries. So these were kind of fascinating for me to look into other resources like books, to search in web to get more ideas. So this was kind of kindled an interest in space science. In addition to that, going to space like school festivals, like focusing on science workshops and interacting with other people, attending seminars and small workshops had helped me to gain more interest in space related technologies and science.
So for me, I kind of always had a passion for math and science as a kid, especially in space. But unfortunately, I didn't really have any role models of women in space that could help me kind of visualize a career. So when I got to uni, I picked engineering because it seemed more practical. But I guess I ended up following my curiosity in space, and university is a great thing where, you don't always have to know exactly what you want to do right away. The opportunities are always coming and going. So I kind of sidestepped into space, and now I'm able to combine both engineering and astronomy, which is great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that sort of answers my next question, I guess, about, you know, when did you sort of decide you wanted to pursue this particular science or this field in the context of space and sort of within the space industry as well. So, Caitlin, for example, you know, when did you know you wanted to pursue biology in this sort of context?
Around like 2018, I was reading about this amazing technology that NASA had developed, where they were using these proteins that are present in all forms of life to help build new water filters. So the filters that they used to send up would break down, the contaminants would go through, they'd cost a lot to repair, and they wouldn't do the job properly. So sometimes people get unwell from not working well. And so by studying what happens in nature, they were able to do this amazing technological advance, which is just so super cool. And then for our team, we realized that some of the mechanisms that we were working on in plants could also be adapted to advance that technology even further. And so it was like the challenge of, can we build this? Can we do this next step in advancing how it works, inspired by the achievements from NASA?
And thank you. And Namisha or Joyce, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, maybe. So I did my bachelor's in electronics engineering. I was forced to take this branch of studies because there was a lot of job prospects in that field. Because if you do that particular branch of engineering course, then there's a high chance that you get a good paying job. And so I went for that, and then I got a job, and I was working in industry. But this thing was there always in my mind, that the space sector, the astronomy. I still remember that in my childhood days, I look up the sky. I was born and brought up in a village where we had a very dark sky and full of stars. So I used to wake up in the morning with my mom, and so the first thing we would do is we go out if the weather is good, and then look at the stars. And then slowly I made that kind of a hobby. Then when I got like star charts and books, and then I could identify which star is which, and which constellation is over there. And then so this interest was always there in my mind. And then while I was working, I started exploring other options where I can go back to my most interesting part. And then I could find an interesting course where I could use my engineering expertise to develop space instruments. So I could do a course in like astronomical and space instrumentation. And then I was introduced to the concepts of space technology and things like that. So I started working working in a group where we fly like high altitude balloon where to study ultraviolet emissions from stars by flying telescopes on high altitude balloon platform. We had a lot of failures, but then by understanding those failures and then understanding those mistakes and correcting for that, kind of gave a good introduction for space instrumentation.
Thank you, Joyce. I can definitely relate to what you were saying before about, reading lots of books as a child and, being passionate about space. I sort of started out, my passion for astronomy sort of started out the same way. I used to read lots of books as a child. But, as I guess when you're growing up and, when you have this passion for science and particularly space, sometimes it can be hard convincing people that what you want to do is, a good idea. And can you, I guess, tell us if there was ever a time that you felt someone thought you couldn't be a scientist, or, your idea for experiment wasn't going to work, and, what did you do? So Namisha, for example, you mentioned before that, you didn't have any role models when you were growing up. How did you deal with that? And yeah, please.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. I also kind of thought growing up that, having a job in space meant you had to be an astronaut, or, you had to be really, really good at maths and science. But really, it's just about having the will and motivation and being curious about the subject. And so I think during uni, I was doing engineering, but I also just kind of kept my ears and eyes open for any opportunities that interested me in space and astronomy. And yeah, slowly I just met the right people, and I did the relevant research projects, and yeah, so here I am.
I think I agree with what Namisha said about basically just following your curiosity, and I think for everyone as they go through deciding what they want to do with their life and their career, there's people out there who will be great advocates and supporters and help you and guide you, and then there'll be people who say things negative, like it's inevitable. You come across that, and you'd sort of alluded to being persistent and just keeping going, and making sure you sort of follow what you really want to do, and just not take it on board if people suggest, oh no, you wouldn't be the right person for that or something. Just don't listen to that and just do it anyway.
And it's definitely too, I think, about charting your own path, as far as, you don't have to follow someone else's path, so you can choose your own. And that's kind of freeing and liberating, because you don't have to worry about, like you were saying, people who say negative things. Well, they're not on the same path you're on. So you can just keep going on your path and not worry about it.
Yeah, maybe I can also jump in by citing an example. During my PhD, I was told to design and develop a telescope on a lunar mission. So initially, when the problem was given to me, and other people were like very skeptical, like, I won't be able to finish it, because that was supposed to be one of the lightest telescope to be developed, to be placed on the moon. We had a lot of constraint on time, funding, resources. So there were a lot of discouragement from various sides. But then I had a great mentor and great team. Then we kind of took this negative inputs to understand, okay, what's the issue, what's the problem, and then we try to make a plan B by getting those inputs, even if those were negative inputs. We try to work it the other way around and to find the solution, and then finally we delivered it. And so people were so surprised to see the final output. So of course you will have a lot of setbacks, especially in space business. Space is hard. You will have a lot of setbacks. You will have a lot of discouragement. But as others pointed out, you have to take what is needed. You don't have to consider what is not needed, and then move your way forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's certainly a field that requires a lot of resilience, like most fields. A lot of persistence, and yeah, I guess in the same vein, of persisting through and pursuing this field and your passion, even when there's times that you don't think you can. How do you cope when your own science or your own experiments don't go to plan, or a particular project doesn't work out?
I think, in the context of the science side, you get so passionate about progressing with science that sometimes the results of experiments are like an emotional roller coaster. When it works, it's like amazing, the best thing ever. And then when it doesn't work, it's like, oh no, the end of the world. And I guess the buffer for getting through those tough times when it's not working is to engage with your colleagues and to talk to them about it and brainstorm and try different approaches. And again, I guess not give up, just keep thinking about it and keep figuring out what the next steps are. And also try and remember that sometimes when experiments don't go the way you expect them to, that's when you actually learn the most. So, failed experiments have been the cause of amazing discoveries for humanity previously.
Yeah, very much the same experience for me. You know, when I first started in my honors project, it would really get to me when something didn't work and I took it personally. But a lot of what we do is figuring out, you know, what doesn't work so that we can figure out what does work. And, you know, if things went to plan all the time, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have work to do. So, you know, you have to check things, calibrate things. Sometimes it's the most simplest thing as well. In my honors project, I spent hours trying to figure out why I wasn't getting the results I wanted. And it turns out I actually forgot to turn on one of the pieces of equipment. So yeah, definitely reaching out to your colleagues, you know, the more minds at work, the better. And yeah, just knowing that, you know, when it's not going to plan, you can also learn from that as well.
Yeah, I agree completely on that aspect. I can probably cite another example. When I joined for my master's, my project was to develop instruments for high altitude balloon experiment. So basically you develop payloads to launch to near space around 25 to 30 kilometers using hydrogen or helium filled balloons. So at some point of time, you need to detach your payload from the balloon. So you need to have a cut down mechanism. So even though it seems to be simple, and then we started working on that, but and then of course we had to do like certain ground testing to ensure that it would withstand the low temperature over at that altitude. And then we worked on it, and then we had like 3 or 4 failures continuously. And then at one point of time, the balloon drifted such that it went on to the sea, and then we lost it completely. And after 2 or 3 days, the fishermen got it, and then they called me. Okay, they called us that yeah, so they got it. So but the experiment was a complete failure. But then after the 4th failure, every time we try to iterate, and then we learn from all those mistakes, small errors. And then in space business, even a small mistake could jeopardize your complete experiment. So after the 4th iteration, we knew that, okay, what all were the mistakes, and then we implemented all those solutions, and then we have a very robust system now. So like others mentioned, the resilience and persistence is very important to move forward in this business.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree about getting sort of very emotionally invested in a project that you're working on. You know, when you work on it for so long, you just become super invested in it, and you know, you're really excited about the outcome. And sometimes when it doesn't work out, it's so easy to get upset about it. But I guess, you know, as you said, you sort of have to detach from it and you know, remember that it's like not a reflection of you. It's just sometimes it doesn't work out. And as Caitlin said, you know, some of the greatest discoveries can come from, you know, failed experiments. So speaking of, you know, experiments and projects, could you talk a bit more about the projects that you're working on, you know, at the moment? And can you, I guess, kind of describe a typical day at your job in the space industry?
Well, one of the things that our team's focusing on at the moment is where we'd talked about how NASA pioneered this work where you can take astronaut pee, filter it and turn it into clean drinking water. We're trying to also adapt that type of technology so that when you're doing that process of filtration, or we refer to as separation, that you could harvest other things. So say, for example, at the International Space Station, they want to be able to grow plants, and plants need nutrients, which means you need to supply the nutrients. There's a lot of nutrients in the waste, but it's not in a purified form. So what happens with the existing water filters is you filter it, you get the clean water, everything else just kind of gets like wrapped in foil and stuck to the side of the craft. It's like a waste form. Whereas we feel like we'd be able to adapt this technology so that you can harvest out key resources and reuse them. And if we can solve that kind of problem for up in space, where, you know, recycling is really important and using everything really efficiently is really important, then we can also hopefully apply that back on Earth and be able to retrieve important resources out of our wastewater down here. So work towards sort of a circular green economy and have better environmental impact. So that's what our team are focused on at the moment.
I can go next. So for me, a lot of what we do is I suppose if it was an ideal world, you'd turn on a laser and it would have an infinite beam length and it would be on forever, but that's not the case. And so in space, sometimes lasers fail as well. So we try and we build systems to automate the laser turning on and stabilizing itself, and we try and reduce effects that make it unstable. And they can be really sensitive. For example, seismic activity on Earth can affect lasers on Earth, or things like quantum fluctuations and electronic noise. So, these are all very physicsy things, but we do need to think about them to actually make the laser work in space. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, my job typically involves design and development of optical telescopes and cameras to be used in space for astronomical as well as for Earth observation. So more specifically, we are working on an infrared telescope to be put on International Space Station to observe infrared lights from these stars, which we call as cool stars. So that's one of the projects I'm working on. So this involves working with various engineers, scientists, and also different program managers. So this involves weekly meetings and then updates on what is going on and things like that. And on another note, we are working on the design of Earth observation payload for Australian wildfire monitoring by, again, looking back to Earth from a satellite platform. So basically it's a telescope, but looking at Earth at particular wavelength, so that we can predict the wildfire possibilities in the next year or so. And another thing I'm working on is testing of satellites. So as I had mentioned, we need to ensure that the satellite could withstand all these hard conditions in space. So typically when you see a news that a satellite has been launched to space, we used to build like 3 or 4 models of the same satellites. First, we call it a laboratory model, which is the initial model. Then there is an engineering model. Then there is a flight model. Then there is an acceptance model. So probably your laboratory model may fail during the test. So then you will learn, okay, what happened, and then apply those corrections in the next model. So that's a minimum of 3 to 4 models we develop and then test before we finally launch a final, satellite to space. So that's typical, my work life here at this Stormlaw.
Thank you. Everyone's project sounds like super interesting, and so, yeah, it's great to hear about your research. So I'll ask a few more questions, and just so everyone knows, we'll be having an open Q&A session afterwards where you can ask our researchers some questions. So make sure you have your questions ready, or send them to Manik and James at Young Stars, so we'll ask them for you. So I guess your job and your day-to-day life sounds super interesting. I have to ask, what's apart from the the downsides of when an experiment doesn't work or something, what's your favorite part of your job?
I find the favorite part is when experiments do work, surprise, surprise, and but then when you learn something that probably no one's ever learned before, right? So you're sort of sitting on this information, this knowledge, this new knowledge, and you're like, oh my gosh, what if I'm like the only person in the world that knows this? And of course, for all of us as scientists, our key responsibility is to share information. So once we've repeated experiments enough time that we have great confidence that what we've learned is reliable, then we have to communicate it by publishing it. But before we can get to that point, there is a point when we're sitting on this new information, and that's a pretty exciting feeling, and I think a great privilege to be able to work in science and be able to learn new things and push the boundaries of human knowledge.
For me, my favorite thing is just the people. Everyone is so passionate about what they're doing, what they're researching, and we all love bouncing ideas off of each other. And yeah, everyone is just like so passionate about what they're doing. I suppose in engineering, it's what I did for my undergraduate, but when I met people in the physics department, that's where I really felt like, yeah, these are my people. We're all nerding out over physics. So yeah.
think for me also it's the same. Just want to add a bit. So you will get a chance when you work in a space sector to push the boundaries. Like as I mentioned, space is hard, and so so you may see some data which other people might not have seen. You may able to help the community to push the boundaries, to venture into new ideas or new discovery. So that's exciting vision in the future, which kind of drives us, to do our daily jobs.
Thank you. So our last question before we move on to the Q&A would be, what is the best advice anyone's ever given you about being a scientist, and what's some advice that you would give to students intending to pursue a career in science and in the space industry?
This question reminds me of a time, like during my PhD studies, when an experiment hadn't worked and I was like really upset about it, and I was walking down the corridor, and I'm pretty sure like I was just ready to burst into tears because I was so upset, holding back tears. And one of my colleagues was walking past, and I think just read my body language and was just like, "Caitlin, it's supposed to be fun." And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely it is. And sometimes you have bad days and you have to be reminded of that. But I guess it's just always stuck with me now, like even when things are tough, is to just have that mindset of, yeah, science is supposed to be fun, and there are a lot of really fun moments. And so to just, enjoy and appreciate those fun moments. So that was my favorite advice.
For me, the best advice I ever received, and it doesn't just apply to science, it's really for anything, but it's always stuck with me, is that you don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. And in fact, that can be a good thing. It can be intimidating when you're surrounded by such great minds, but that just means you have so much to learn from all these people. So yeah, that's what I would pass on to you guys. If you're curious about something and you want to learn more, definitely don't be intimidated by it. You've got to lean into it and follow your passions.
Yeah, the kind of advice I have got during my PhD from my mentor was, don't be afraid of making mistakes, and you can always learn from failed experiments. So that's kind of was a good driving force for me to just try out. Even if you may make mistakes, you will learn something finally. And another thing is, go after what make you excited and happy. That's most important thing, right? And so that would allow you to follow your curiosity and be passionate about what you do. And so I think in an essence, if you have those things, nothing can stop you.
I agree. And someone once told me that every time you fail, it's just really a way to look for more clues on how to succeed. So take those bits of information that you learn and use them to go forward in a different direction. And then once you have that information, you work really hard to have success in the future. And it's okay to fail. Like, it's absolutely okay to fail. And I think that once you take that pressure off yourself and you know that it's all a journey, it's not just that you're going to do 1, 2, 3 and then get to your destination. It's just going to be a winding path, and enjoy it.
Absolutely agree with this. Yeah, everything that you said, yeah, that's great. And space and going into the space industry and science as well is really hard, but you have to kind of embrace the challenge and yeah. So thank you so much to all of our researchers and panelists. I guess we'll if anyone has any questions, we'll hear from the kids now. And we have some questions already, so I will probably go through them. But if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand or send through your question to Mike and James. So I guess the first question is, and this is a really interesting one, what's the most common job in the space community? So this is interesting because I guess, so the most famous or, you know, well-known job would be like astronaut or something, but that only makes up a really small fraction of, you know, all of the different jobs that you can have in the space industry. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
In my opinion, I don't think there's one common job that, you know, the majority does. But I would say the process is, you know, similar. You have a theory, you test something, you iterate through that, you know, you make stuff and yeah, and then that kind of ends up being used for a space mission or something like that. So yeah, the scientific process, I think, is something that most people follow. But yeah, I think every job is unique in space. You know, there's so many aspects to it that yeah, everyone does something different.
Thank you. And do you, in your opinion, do you think it's okay to stay in like Australia, for example, to work in the space industry? Because Karen asks, you know, should we all go to the, you know, is it better to go to like the USA or Europe, for example, to have a space career?
Well, I think a lot of people in Australia did that for a long time. So if they fell in love with something and they were working in space, the goal was always to go maybe to NASA or ESA to work at a larger, you know, again, when you're thinking about it, working for a large government who has the funding to send up astronauts or to do, you know, anything related to that. Because what we see is we might see an astronaut, but there might be hundreds of people who've contributed to that mission for that one astronaut. So, so we see a small fraction of people. And so people would go and they would leave Australia. What we're seeing now is more researchers and people who've been working in the space industry around the world coming home and coming back to Australia. And that's something that's really helping the industry grow as well. So we're just bringing in new people from places like ANU, but also having people who have been experts in other parts of the world coming back. And so as we see that, we'll continue to grow and grow and grow. And it also gives people who don't want to go overseas a really good opportunity to work with experts and to work with people from all around the world. And so that's kind of the new future of what we're seeing.
Also, we see that the space industry in Australia is booming. You are seeing a lot of startups, more jobs, and the government agenda is also to create thousands, 10,000s of jobs in the coming years, especially in the space sector. So I think definitely there is a future for Australian space industry, and we have a new space agency. A lot of things are happening, more collaborations, and we can also here at the test facility see, like, compared to previous years, more and more satellites are coming up from different industries and research institutes for testing. So that's a clear indication that we are in a right path and we have a great future for space in Australia.
I think the really rapid change and pace of the space industry means that there's great opportunity to build your own career. So I think, like, you know, for all those people who are picturing things that they love and things that they want to contribute to the world, the space industry is a wonderful industry to be able to just come in and pioneer, because it's growing so quickly.
Yeah, and also I'm an advocate for human space exploration, and as a human being, we should be a multiplanetary species. It's a great vision by Elon Musk and many others. But anyway, these are you know, exciting times. You see civilians go to space, and in the coming years, you will see people who will go to Mars, Moon, and I'm sure the way forward won't be easy. But then that's why we need brilliant minds like you, like youngsters like you. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So Davish has a question. So would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
So what are the benefits of exploring space?
I can try give this a shot. I think that the answer is twofold, in my opinion. Exploring space means we can answer, you know, the most fundamental questions, and you know, humans are curious species. We want to know why we're here, where we're going, how did we get here, And yeah, looking up to the sky, there's this vast, you know, sea of stars, and naturally we're curious about it. So we get to kind of satisfy that curiosity piece by piece by learning about the universe. But also the technology we developed to kind of enable ourselves to get into space has propagated throughout, you know, all of society, just like Sophia was explaining, you know. We have the smoke detectors that were actually initially used on NASA space missions, and phone cameras. So all sorts of stuff that we make for space can actually be used every day in everyday life, you know, later.
One of the really cool projects too that's going on in the world right now is so thinking about using solar. So we get solar energy here on Earth, but lots of that can be blocked by clouds and weather. And so if you could put a solar array in orbit that could be in view of the sun and send that energy back to Earth. So solar panels were created for Earth, but then they were used in like the 50s to actually power spacecraft in a more efficient way than batteries could. And now that could eventually come back again to Earth. I mean, we've got them here, but that power could be coming from space onto Earth and power. If you're within range of that array, you might be able to use any device anywhere if there's enough of those solar arrays. So you can see that like you were saying, the technology, it really translates, but it can go back and forth as we continue to explore. We can get benefits and then new benefits, you know, decades down the road. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for everybody.
Definitely. So Camden, do you want to unmute and ask your question as well?
So how was the universe created? I mean, sorry, just the solar system. I already know, I'm just gonna say it.
Well, our researchers are welcome to answer, but we normally leave the very spacey questions for our talks. But yep, you're welcome to answer if you like. Otherwise, we can definitely answer that in a future talk. So Shiva, would you like to unmute and ask your question as well?
So I was asking, this question is for Matthew. So like, have you used nanotech for any of the satellites, like any nanotech?
Yeah, personally, I haven't used it as of now, but we are seeing many companies are using these nanotechnologies to build lightweight structures, because you have to be very optimized when you send anything to space, because each gram costs you thousands of dollars. So, well, yeah, so the nanotechnology people are using to develop very lightweight but very strong structures to make parts of satellites. This is called nanotubes or nanocarbon tubes, for example. And there are different kinds of sensors where people use this nanotechnology to miniaturize their sensors and to increase the efficiency of those sensors. So as you pointed out, the nanotechnology is kind of a relatively new technology compared to other technologies, but people are leveraging the capabilities of that to make your satellites and system more efficient.
We also have another question from Naomi, and it's, I guess, along the same vein of, you know, the benefits of, you know, spending money and funding space research. You know, should we spend money on Earth instead of space research?
One perspective in the context of giving that consideration is that there's massive challenges that humanity faces, whether we're in space or whether we're on Earth, in the context of how we use our resources and how we make sure that we have enough energy, we have enough food, and we have enough clean water, and what we do with all our things. And so where there's these common challenges that impact how we exist in space and how we exist in Earth, if we can solve those challenges, we can benefit both, you know, the exploration of space and how well we live on this planet and how sustainable we are. And I think the limitations of what can and can't be achieved in space sometimes drive us to be more innovative and come up with things that we maybe never would have come up with before if we weren't facing that challenge. So I think we should prioritize things that solve humanity's grand challenges, but also you know, have the opportunity to be creative in our problem solving.
Absolutely, thank you. So Lola, do you want to ask the next question?
My question was, can you go into space without being an astronaut?
Do you mean physically go into space?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that. Yeah, I mean, so to go to space, we call people who actually go to space, we call them astronauts, but you don't have to be like a typical astronaut. Recently, maybe you have seen the news that I forgot the mission name was Inspiration, an Inspiration crew. There were, I think, 4 of them went to space on a NASA, on a SpaceX Dragon module. So you, of course, you have to go through different types of training to be in zero gravity and to manage certain things when you are in space. But these days, I think space is opening up for civilians. So you don't have to be a typical NASA or ESA trained astronaut, but civilians could also go to space. And I think in the coming years, we will see more of that. And another thing was that Virgin Galactic, they also are opening up for space tourism. You can go to space as a space tourist on their one of their spaceships. But of course, you have to go to a certain type of training, which may last for a couple of months before you finally travel to space.
There's a whole new section too of the space industry called space tourism that's popped up, and it's basically that people paying to go to space, and they may have a lot of training or they may not, and in most cases they really don't. But what's interesting about that, and you'll see these sorts of things happen more and more, is that doctors are now thinking about, well, what do we need to know about people before, if they're not like a highly trained astronaut who spent years trying to learn how to live in space and deal with the challenges that come with that. If you just have a normal person who may have health conditions or may not, and you sort of blast them into space, what happens? And so like here at ANU, we have someone working on what's called medical digital twins. So they find all the information about your medical history and who you are, and then they try to work out what could potentially happen to you when you get into space. So as we start to see, space tourism, those kinds of things, there's science that we have on Earth, like telehealth, that we use when we send people to space, but we can develop new kinds of sciences and medicine practice and that sort of thing to learn more from people as they do travel into space.
I would also just like to add, going to space, that was always kind of my pipe dream as a kid. I always imagined myself going to the moon. But I have noticed, growing up, the whole idea of space has just become a lot more accessible. We can see all these beautiful pictures of stars and moons and other planets. And so, it's much more widely available, and hopefully that trend will keep continuing.
Definitely. So on that same vein, I guess, do you know anyone, or have there been many people from ANU who or any alumni that you know of that have ended up working in, for example, NASA, or going on to this kind of astronaut training, for example?
A lot of my research team actually, they finish their PhD at ANU and they do what's called a postdoctorate at NASA or ESA. So yeah, there are opportunities. There's so many. And the great thing is if you want to stay in Australia, stay at home, you can, but you can also travel all over the world doing these types of things. So yeah, definitely.
We have quite a few researchers who have worked with NASA or have worked at NASA facilities and have returned back to Australia and are at ANU. So there's a really good group of people who have that great experience. But then there's also, like Caitlin was saying earlier, a lot of people who are here in Australia who are just paving a new way and doing it differently. And that's really exciting too.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, actually, also from Aditi. You know, does InSpace have any sort of ties with NASA? But yeah, it sounds like a lot of the researchers there have connections, which is really, really cool. And so for you know, kids or students that want to you know, study and want a career in space, or for example, you know, be an astronaut or something, you know, what kind of things would you need to study, for example? Yeah.
I guess I would suggest that, you know, studying science always helps because science is a pathway to solving problems. But I mean, as we discussed before, the types of jobs in space are going to be far reaching. And, you know, Kathleen and her InSpace team support people who are in the area of law and people who are in the area of medicine, and, you know, great diversity in careers. And so I think it's not going to be as limiting as it maybe it has in the past. And I think for the students here today, I mean, similar to what Joyce had mentioned before, having young brains that are super creative come in and create that space is really important. And so I think that, you know, young people will be able to come through and define what happens in the future. It'll be their choice, and it'll be their future to build it into what they want to build it into.
Absolutely. I guess adding on to that, you know, I would say just pursue whatever you would like to in university. And if you want to, you know, end up in the space industry, there will be a way that you can end up in the space industry with, you know, with what you've studied. So yeah, so I think we'll probably wrap up now. Thank you so much to our researchers and our panelists. That was a fantastic discussion, and it was great to hear from everyone about all their different research disciplines and their projects that you're working on. And it was also great to hear about the variety of different career pathways that you can have in going into the space industry. You know, we know now that, you know, you don't just have to study astrophysics, for example, or just be an astronaut or an astronomer. You know, you can do all of these really amazing things and still do it within the context of space.